Hey biologists, Mr. Fott here. Today we're going to be talking about light and wavelengths. So first up are the need to knows. So we're going to talk about how organisms capture and store energy used in biological processes. Also, how photosystems convert solar energy into chemical energy. And last, photosynthesis is going to be the capturing of energy from the sun into its production of sugars. So a few things before we get into any of this whole photosynthesis business is that we want to first talk about plants kind of in general. So plants are oftentimes referred to as autotrophs, but specifically they are referred to as photoautotrophs. So if we were to break this word down, photo in Greek or photos literally translates to light, and synthesis means to make or to create. So this process of photosynthesis means that you are making and creating things using light. Now, if we were to apply this to the term photoautotroph, auto means self. Troph refers to energy. And so the literal translation to a photoautotroph would be photo, light, auto, self, troph, energy. It uses sunlight to make its own energy or energy itself. Thus, we're using the light energy to make its own organic molecules. It does not need to consume something. It does not need to ingest or eat or any sorts of things like that. Obviously, there are exceptions. That's not always the rule, of course. There are always those exceptions, but that's, of course, not what we're going to be talking about. So, generally speaking, 99% of the time that our plants are going to be photoautotrophs. Now, oppositely here, us as organisms that are heterotrophs, we are going to need to consume our organic material. Thus, we have the need to feed. So, we need to then eat or consume our food, breaking it down into those glucose or other molecules so that we can move on to do our cell respiration business. Now, again, photoautotrophs, typically what we're going to see, there is a wide range of different sorts of things. Plants, of course, are the plethora of going to be of them. We also see other types of alga or algae, if you will, cyanobacteria, that's blue-green algae. Those are the ones that produce those giant algal blooms. Purple sulfate bacteria is another one here. Those produce the more so like the red tide, and our unicellular protists. So even some of our bacteria friends have the ability to do this photoautotrophism. Specifically, what we're going to need to be able to do this, though, as long as you have a chloroplast, which is why even though bacteria, those prokaryotes, generally speaking, are not going to have those membrane-bound organelles, such as a chloroplast, there are some of them that are always going to break those rules. So we always like to make those rules, of course, to break those rules. So for the photosynthesis process, this is about converting, again, that sunlight energy into chemical energy that we refer to as a food source or energy source, if you will. Now, the chloroplasts, these are going to be the main sites of our photosynthesis. Now, it does have a few different internal structures that you may recall from standard bio. So first off, we have the double membraned layer. So again, just like our mitochondria from cell respiration, we have the double layered. We have the outer membrane and an inner membrane. Additionally, we are going to have some inside space referred to as the stroma. And this is kind of like a cytoplasm, cytosol, this like jelly-like substance that's on the inside of our chloroplast, but like basically this open space. And that's going to be one portion of our photosynthesis when we talk about that in our next notes. Additionally, what we're going to have are these little like wafer looking things or pancake looking things, right? These are each referred to as a thylakoid. So each one of these individually are known as a thylakoid. However, when you have the whole stack of them, the stack of all these thylakoids, they then refer to it as a granum. Now, specifically inside of our plants, mostly it's going to take place in a specific type of cell referred to as a mesophyll cell. These are the types of cells which, generally speaking, are in the plant leaves or other green portions of the plant that are going to do a lot of our photosynthesis. Now, something special about plants, specifically their leaves, is that they have specialized structures that allow them to breathe. So they need to breathe just like we need to breathe. Our specialized structure is referred to as our respiratory system or the lungs, right? But the plant, they don't have lungs. They don't have that type of specialized organ or organ system. What they do have, however, is that they have specialized cells that are typically located underneath the plant leaf. So flip it over, and you're going to see these stomata. And these are basically like these open pores that allow for the plants to do their gas exchange. So again, similarly to how we do our gas exchange within our lungs, we get the oxygen in, the carbon dioxide out. Our plants are going to use these stomata to do just the opposite. Carbon dioxide in, oxygen out. And this is going to undergo just a simple diffusion. It's kind of like an open door, i.e., thus it's a pore. So it allows things to openly exchange gases with its environment. Part of what makes the plant its green, you again may recall from standard bio, is that we have this pigment called chlorophyll. This is a green color pigment, and there are a slew of other pigments that exist out there. For instance, our skin color pigment is referred to as our melanin, you may recall. Thus, if you were to get skin cancer, they refer to it as melanoma. So basically, anything that's going to have a color is going to have some sort of pigment or dye. It's going to have a chemical that's going to give it that coloration. And in our plants, what's specific to them is going to be this chlorophyll thing. Now, we're going to talk about sunlight for just a little bit before actually getting into the photosynthesis process. We're going to save that for the next set of notes. But basically, we need the sunlight so that we can do the first half of our chemical reactions, referred to as a light reactions or light-dependent series of chemical reactions. So we have to be able to utilize this sunlight to convert the energy from the light, from the sunlight here, from the waves, into chemical energy, specifically ATP, and another additional energy molecule we'll talk about, NADPH. Now, basically what the sunlight is, if you've never had this explained to you, we'll talk about it for just a little bit. That's going to be from here on out the rest of our notes. So light, i.e. sunlight here, is a form of energy, specifically electromagnetic radiation. And we use what's called the EMS, the electromagnetic spectrum, to then measure those different waves, not just sunlight, but other types of those waves. And we have different lengths of waves. We can either have very short and tiny waves, much like gamma rays. We can have big, long waves, like radio waves, for instance. So if you have shorter waves, they have higher energy, but longer waves are going to have less energy. We are going to be talking mostly about the visible light spectrum. So these are things that are able to be detected by the human eye. There are, of course, other types of waves that exist out there, ultraviolet, infrared, etc., that other organisms, like for instance a mantis shrimp, can see beyond what we can talk about here. But typically, when we're referring to the colors that we can see, we refer to it as visible light. Now, light can do a few different things. It can either be reflected, which means it's going to bounce off of something, or transmitted, which means it's going to pass through something, or even absorbed actually into this. So we're going to be talking about what does light actually do as it regards to the process of photosynthesis. So here is that EMS, the electromagnetic spectrum, just kind of in totality here. So our visible light, again, what we're for the most part going to be talking about, is approximately between 380 and 750. And you may notice that if you look at this carefully, that's a rainbow is what it is. And so that in and of itself is actually all the different colors that we have the capability of seeing. Again, the standard human eye. Those that are colorblind, of course, are going to have some gaps in this visible light spectrum. But we have the shorter waves being more towards the purpley violet. Thus, if we move beyond that, we get to the ultraviolet section into X-rays and gamma rays. Those are the smaller waves. However, they do have higher amounts of energy, which is why we need to protect ourselves from things like ultraviolet, thus we wear sunscreen, X-rays, which is why you have to wear the lead vest, or gamma rays, which you and I are probably never going to come into contact with, unless you're going to be some specialized scientists or work in space or something. But there's specialized equipment that are going to help you absorb and protect you from those rays. You may be thinking to yourself, well, hold on a second. What about Bruce Banner? I always like to talk about that for a second. Unfortunately, no, you will not turn into the Incredible Hulk if you're to be blasted with gamma rays. What you will turn into, though, is the Incredible Cancer. Yeah, that's typically what's going to happen with those shorter, higher energy waves, is that they're going to get down to the cellular level, genetic level, DNA level, to start to cause some mutations, ultimately resulting in either chemical burns or you're going to get to mutations causing cancer. So that's a problem. Now, if we move in the other spectrum here, the 750, that's towards the red. There's orange down there at about like 650 to 700. You move beyond that, we get to what's known as infrared or thermal vision is what we can get to. Keep going, we get to microwaves. Ultimately, our radio waves, again, these are long waves. So if you think about it for a moment, those radio waves, they really are huge. They can span miles and miles and miles. Like, for instance, I can listen to radio stations from Lansing all the way over here in Metro Detroit. It's over like 60 to 80 miles away, but I can still, pick up those radio waves and still be able to cipher through what their messages that they're sending. Thus, I listen to my radio station. So those radio waves are huge, these massively long waves, and in part, they're going to have these low amounts of energy. So no, you don't need to worry about radio waves causing any sorts of cancers or messing with your mind or anything. If you ever hear that, that's total bunk. Don't listen to it. Anywho, again, what we're going to be focusing on is the visible light spectrum, working from our 380, that's like the purpley violet type of colors, up to our 750 with the reds and oranges. Now, the unit here is going to be NM, standing for nanometer, but sometimes they might use angstroms as an additional unit. So just be aware, potentially there could be some different units, either nanometers or angstroms. Now, what's going on with sunlight and how does this relate to photosynthesis? Here's the structure of our chloroplast. Again, the sunlight coming through, and sunlight is actually producing white light. It's producing all of the spectrums, which is why after a rainy day, when the sun comes out, you see the rainbow. You see all of the colors. This is known as white light. Now, when this white light gets shown from the sun here, it's either going to do a few things. It's going to reflect certain waves, thus we see those colors. So technically speaking, when we look at the green plant, it's not green, it's reflecting green. But some of the other colors are then going to be absorbed. Now, this last thing, transmitted, just simply means moving through. So it can pass through almost like a filter sorts of things. So it can do a few different things again. It can either reflect and then bounce off, so that wave will bounce and then reach our eye, thus we perceive it or see that color. It can be absorbed, which means that energy is going to go into that chemical or that molecule, or transmitted, which means it's going to pass right through it. Now, why we're talking about all this stuff, why these pigments and things, is that there are a few different ones that we're going to be focusing on in this photosynthesis process. So it's going to absorb different wavelengths with the different pigments. Now, each pigment is going to respond or resonate with different waves or different colors, for instance. So chlorophyll is actually going to be very good at absorbing specific wavelengths, like the violet blue and the red specifically. Green, it does a really bad job at, unfortunately. In fact, it's going to reflect that color. Thus, we again perceive the color of a plant as green. So there are two different types of chlorophylls, chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B. They work very similarly. Again, they're pigment molecules. So they're going to reflect certain colors and absorb other colors. So it's going to take part in our light-dependent series of chemical reactions to help drive that. We need to use that energy. It needs to absorb certain wavelengths so they can then drive the chemical reaction forward. There are, of course, other pigments that exist in there. Carotenoids is one of them. That's how you pronounce that, carotenoids. And they exist more as a yellow-orangey type of thing. And we'll take a look at in just a second what colors and wavelengths those ones are going to be reflecting versus absorbing. There are, of course, a slew of other pigments in there. Xanthophylls is another type of pigment. This is where you get all of the plethora of other colors that we don't really see until fall. We see the reds, we see the oranges, sometimes the browns towards the end. We'll kind of get that in there when the leaves are ready to fall off. So there are other pigments that are going on, but within this photosynthesis process, chlorophyll is our main player, both chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B. Now, what scientists can use, and again, if we were in class, we would be able to detect these things. So unfortunately, we'll just talk about it here, that we can use what's called a spectrophotometer that we can detect these things. So that's really what this thing is, not galvanometer. That's not really what we call it. We call it a spectrophotometer. And it's going to measure the amount of transmittance, or how much does the light have the capability of passing through certain things. So we can measure how much is going to absorb or how much is going to reflect based off of one of these things, again, the spectrophotometer, that we can then use to calculate or to measure here the amount of light being reflected or absorbed. And again, it's on a percent basis, so it's going to have to be between 0 and 100. If we were to graph these things out, this is the data that we would see. So here is our purple and violet towards the 400N, all the way up to the red towards the 700N. And there's the three different pigments that are the main players. Again, chlorophylls are mostly the main players. Carotenoids are just another one that's kind of in there that occasionally play a factor into this. But we see as part of this graph on our y-axis, we have the absorption of light. So what wavelengths are they absorbing? So when we see these tall peaks, these are the waves that they are absorbing that energy. They're internalizing it. And when we see these valleys, these low peaks, those are the colors that they are not absorbing, but in fact reflecting is what they're doing. So if we look at the chlorophylls, I'm going to ignore the carotenoids here for a moment. We have two major peaks down here in the 400 to 500 range. So about 450, give or take, to 480, kind of plus or minus, somewhere in there. We see the chlorophyll A, chlorophyll B. We have these big peaks, but then they quickly drop off when they start to approach the 500 over to the 600. Notice what color that wavelength is. That's the green wavelength. So they are not absorbing it because they're reflecting it. And again, that's what those molecules of chlorophyll are going to do, absorb certain wavelengths while reflecting others. Then we have another series of peaks. We have two ones. Once we start to get to the orange to red, the 650 to about P680, give or take, again, plus or minus, for the chlorophyll A, the chlorophyll B. So now they're, again, absorbing these wavelengths because we have the peaks over here. So that is all we're going to talk about for now. Again, wavelengths and sunlight, and how does this play into the photosynthesis business. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to email me, jfod@shoreline.org, or, of course, show up to class and ask your questions, or send me some Schoology messages. Have a fantastic day.